History and resources for novelty zithers, mainly the Ukelin, but also the Violin-uke, the Marxophone, guitar zithers, Hawaiian tremola, Hawaiian art violin, and more. This is another JDW Talks. My targeted audience are collectors and players of antique novelty zithers. And this was recorded on Halloween, October 31st, 2020. This would be a good one for trick and treating. This is dedicated to the memory of Pops Spencer, Harold Spencer. And there he is with all his collection. Not all of them. There are actually some more he had owned. And we'll talk about that later. So I'm going to show you the topic outline, what I expect to accomplish in this video. I think it's going to be an interesting one. And you can see I'm going to do an overview, do some definitions. What is a novelty zither? Why was it popular? Why did people buy it? My history with the novelty zithers, which goes back to 1974, and talk about current resources, such as the Facebook group, and then a continuation of this. And here's a continuation of the topic outline. I'm going to go into the major manufacturers that I found for these instruments, make a possible family tree, talk about the more common instruments, their names, where you can get instructions for them. There'll be an emphasis on the Ukelin, and then I will conclude with some references that you can look up on this topic. In the early 1980s, I wrote an essay with this title, History of the Novelty Zithers of the United States, that summarized my research and my own, and it was done for my own benefit. I think it was accurate up to about the 1980s. Certainly, in preparation for this talk, going online, I've seen some more novelty zithers I didn't know existed at the time I wrote the essay. So keep that in mind. But I'm going to use this essay as the backbone of this video. So we're talking about novelty zithers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They were sold by door-to-door salesmen. And in fact, I'll describe one of those sales that was made by Russ Johnson's father. And they were rarely found in legitimate music stores. So what is a zither? Well, according to the Google definition, it's some sort of musical instrument consisting of a flat wooden sound box with numerous strings stretched across it. It was especially used for Central European folk music, and some of these zithers are really professional pieces of equipment. But that's not what I'm going to be looking at. I'm going to be looking at novelty zithers, and a novelty is something that you look at and say, wow, that's really unusual, that's really original. I've never seen something like that. And that's the first reaction that many people have for these novelty zithers. They've never seen them before. Harold Spencer, Pops Spencer, tried to make a living out of going to groups and showing them his instruments and singing old songs. And so here is a advertisement that he showed me about some of the zithers that he had. And they are novelty zithers, because here's what Harold wrote me on February 28, 1981. He says here, 3 years ago, I appeared at a huge bluegrass festival in Tennessee at a talent exhibition. I had to appear in the novelty group. Slide whistles, spoons, storytelling, washtub bass, etc. I was beat out by a musical saw. It was fun. I don't know how much fun it would be to be beaten out by a musical saw, but so before I proceed further, I will show you, I will play for you a song on what was once called in Mugwumps magazine. That was a magazine that concentrated on old kind of folklore instruments. A many-stringed monster. I put together in 1986 a tape recording for my own enjoyment of a number of biology songs I had played on Zithers, and also some musical arrangements I had gotten from other players. And I'm going to rely on those files for some of the arrangements I'm going to play, and especially in my other video on the biology songs that I recorded in 1986. I used the program Audacity, some of you may be aware of that, to enhance the tape recording, and I think it worked out pretty well. So this is why people either love these novelty zithers or why they hate them. Okay, so you might wonder why the apparent popularity of these instruments in the 1920s or 1930s. That's the period of time we're talking about. Well, here is from my collection a advertisement for something called a Hawaiian art violin. We'll talk about that later. And it says, hey, look, you can play this instrument at sight. You don't have to have any musical background at all. Our numerical system of music makes such quick results possible. We prove this by having you play the instrument without previous practice. And they would play a simple tune, and then you would realize there aren't any sharps and flats on this instrument. This is the only musical instrument on the market which will enable you to produce the rich and charming tones. Was that a charming tone you just heard? Of the violin and guitar combined. The instrument is artistically constructed and finished, making in itself a beautiful ornament in the home. And then to illustrate that it would be novel, you could show this to people. The Hawaiian art violin is absolutely new. There's a reason for that. In your community, and you will accordingly find it a source of great interest to your friends when shown to them at your home, at house parties, musicals, or other social events. There's another reason why they were so popular as well, and this is from Mugwumps magazine. They indicated there was a unique combination of door-to-door salesmanship and time purchase plans combined to make the ukulin one of the most frequently encountered instruments in flea markets, garage sales, and antique stores. and that was true of a number of other of these novelty zithers. Pop Spencer believed the instruments were designed for parlor entertainment, and according to this article in 1980, another invention, according to Pops, another invention that marked the downfall of parlor instruments like these was the radio. Interesting idea. My own history started in 1975 when I bought a Ukelin for $3 at a garage sale. And then in 1978, I saw another one of these instruments I paid $60 for. And I started to seriously buy instruments in the early 1980s at swap meets, antique stores, garage sales, anywhere that looked promising. And I eventually had over 20 instruments that cost from $3 to $150. The average price was $48. I kept track of these things. The median cost was $38. And I had accumulated enough information from correspondence, including correspondence from Spencer, that I put together a history essay of novelty zithers in the early 1980s. And I used the zithers in my biology classes for science songs. Eventually, because of moves and downsizing, I broke up the collection in 2005. And so today in 2020, I decided to look at my three-hole binder that I still had quite a bit of information on and put together this and the next video. So my other video is going to be called Dr. J in Concert, Biology Songs on the Zithers. And I will talk about the zithers. I'm going to play on 4 different ones from that 1986 tape. I also corresponded with people. I'm not sure how I found Russ Johnson in 1978. We'll talk about Russ and hear him playing on the Ukelin. I'm not sure how I found Harold Pops Spencer, but in 1981 we started to collaborate. And in 1983, I know that I advertised in Mugwumps. And so there's the Mugwumps issue. And I advertised interested in exchanging information on the novelty zithers of the U.S. And I got one response, only one response. But it was a really important one. Because this is from Paul Christian. His letter indicated he had about 430 zithers, and he continued to find them. I think he was based in Minnesota. He was also a university biologist and entomologist. I'm a university biologist. I'm a field biologist. But he didn't use the instruments in his classes. And then 20 years later, as I'll show you, he donated his collection to the National Music Museum. Paul Christian died in 2010. And this is from his letter, from my ad in Mugwumps. Paul says, I am interested in what responses you may have gotten from your advertisement in Mugwumps, since I haven't come across anyone else who is interested in these instruments before. Well, I think today that really is a different scenario. So the National Music Museum is in South Dakota. And for anyone doing research on these novelty zithers, I would think a pre-planned visit to the museum would be in order. Because they have the Paul and Jean Christian Collection and Archive, and they indicate that the heart of the collection is centered around their systematic assemblage of more than 500 zithers. You realize how many rooms in a house you'd have to have? And an archive of zither-related materials represented musical traditions and cultures from around the world. I'm going to quote from Paul's letter to me when we start looking at the different instruments, some insights into their names. It turns out today, and I found this. I didn't know about it because I haven't really been playing these zithers since 2005, that there's now a Facebook group called the Ukelin and Fretless Zither Appreciation Society. There are 383 members, and if you're interested in these instruments, I would encourage you to join that Facebook group. And here is their homepage. I want to point out something very important to you, especially people who find these instruments, don't know what they are, don't know how to play them, that as you can see here, there's a file section on this Facebook group, and you may indeed find instruction manuals, music, etc. about the instruments you have. So for the recent files on the bottom right, I put on their files 3 instruction manuals, actually more than that, but the 3 show there, to augment their collection. I would recommend this site very much. Also, I'm showing you a URL link to a guitar zither clearinghouse. It looks like this has not been active for decades, but here's one website that does have information that you might be interested in. I'll show you another website later which concentrates on the ukulele. Also, Catherine Rhoda told me that she had a website that she does maintain on these novelty zithers, and I'm showing you two URLs there. The tiny URL goes to her website, and it's the area of her website that has more resources, more website resources for people who want to find out about novel zithers. So I would recommend that as well. So here is a warning from Paul that he wrote me about the zithers. And he says, one of the things about the novelty zithers is that you can't be sure what the instrument will look like from the name alone. Many Marx instruments have the same label, but are very different in shape. Some Oscar Schmidt instruments do too. I have 5 different shaped violin-ukes with the same name. I also have violin-ukes with the same shape, but different name labels. This makes classifying them more difficult. I have 4 different shaped banjolins, all similar but different. Several instruments have 2 labels with different names on each label, like pianoette and over pianolin, which actually is a violin-uke. So you can tear your hair out very quickly, and what I try to do is to actually classify zithers. And remember, this is as of about 1980s, and in the course of preparing this talk, I saw some really bizarre ones online, really bizarre ones. So I'm going to show you the major manufacturers here, a little bit about them, and I probably won't go into too much detail on any one of them. You can pause your video and read it. But I think that basically it really started with the auto harp and Charles Zimmerman, who initially created a play by the numbers, so you wouldn't have to read notes. You just have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and those corresponded to something on the musical instrument. And so he invented the auto harp to play his play by the numbers idea. And there's some history about that. Eventually, the Phonoharp Company of Boston got all of the patents, and eventually all that went to Oscar Schmidt. All these manufacturers seem to have they not only competed with each other, but they cooperated with each other. And a lot of them made the same instruments, but with different labels. I concentrate on Charles Marx, Henry Charles Marx, and the Marx people, because I had a lot of the Marx instruments there, and corresponded with some members of that family. You can see here information about it. They produced ukelins and other, not ukelins, but violin-ukes and other instruments under a variety of names. And you can see the instruments were sold directly to salesmen for $3 and sold for an average of $12.95 during the 1930s. So you can take a look at that. That's an important manufacturer. Harold Spencer wrote to them in 1975. He wanted some information. And here is a response given to Pops. Dear Mr. Spencer, we are no longer actively engaged in business, but made many thousands of violin-ukes as well as other stringed instruments. We have been here in New Troy, Michigan since 1927 and in Chicago before that. Yes, these instruments were sold door to door. They were sold mostly in the South and West. And unknowing to me at that time, I didn't know about Spencer. I also wrote to those people. And on April 4th, 1979, I got a 2-page letter from Henry C. Marx. And he says, Dear Mr. Weintraub, this letter is in response to your recent inquiry regarding Marx instruments. Although there is no instruction book in existence for the pianolin, I can give you some background information on Marx instruments and perhaps some assistance in tuning your pianolin. And he goes through the history of a lot of the instruments. And I put this letter in the files of the Facebook group, historical piece of information. I wrote again in July of 1982, and it was too late. In fact, I get this response in reply to your letter. We have not been active in business since the death of Mr. Charles Marx in 1972. Ironically, Henry C. Marx, the person who responded on my previous one, to whom you addressed this letter, originally died on July 3rd, the day your letter was postmarked. There is now no one here who really knows about the older instruments. Marxophone, Marxochime, and Marxoharp are all old instruments. The Hawaii phone was made here perhaps as late as 1960s. The other two names I provided are not familiar to us. We enclosing 2 old brochures for your collection. And these are not current prices. They were still selling string and some other aspects of it. And there it is. I also sent them the history of the zither in the U.S. at that time. It was enjoyable reading as well as informative. Here is another group out of Boston with different names. And eventually the Phonoharp company was merged with Oscar Schmidt. And I tell you a little bit about that, the decals of the various instruments. And again, you can pause this and read it. Oscar Schmidt, who's known for their auto harps basically today, at least they were in my time, manufactured things out of New Jersey initially. Again, a number of different possible companies here on that. Address of the Jersey City, New Jersey plant. And it talks about in the 1990s, they were part of Fredette Industries of Northbrook, Illinois. I think that has also been taken over. Not sure where that company is today. And again, another popular logo was the eagle carrying an American shield. You see other labels as well. I think some of them are agents that had their own labels and pasted them into these instruments. But here's one that might have been a relative of Oscar Schmidt called Felix Schmidt out of Chicago. So there's all sorts of manufacturers or agents, and the labels are interesting, but it's sometimes not so easy to fit them into a timeline. These companies also sold sheet music, by the number system, not what you kind of expect. And there's a whole bunch of possible sheet music for these instruments, although they were produced in such poor paper that if they exist today, it's a miracle. I have in my collection this catalog of music. There's hundreds of sheets. This is the mandolin guitar. We'll talk about guitars by Oscar Schmidt. There's his Ferry Street, Jersey City, New Jersey. Also, here is another one from New Jersey, the American Music Company, Number Music, a whole bunch of sheet music for that. Give you a look at them. There are a number of harps, 2, 2 1/4, 3 1/2, etc. They also sold these numbered music in, it looks like folios. So here you see Leisure Hour folio number 15. I guess you could buy them all at once. But it also gives you an indication that most of these probably didn't depend on sharps or flats. Here's another look. So I tried to put together a rough family tree of novelty zithers in the 1980s. I obviously didn't pick up a lot of these really bizarre instruments I see today. I can see a lot of these instruments on sale on some place like eBay, for instance. Kind of a neat look at things. And there are other places online where you can see pictures of these instruments. So I don't know how realistic this is, but being a biologist, biologists work with keys a lot and trees, family trees, and being a genealogist, I decided to take an attempt to do this. So let's try and figure out some logic among these various novelty zithers. So the first section are instruments which the chord strings are not together, individual chords there, or individual strings. The auto harp was patented in 1882 by Zimmerman, who said, "I believe it is the best work which a human being so far has achieved on earth." That's nice. Some of the 1890 models had shifters on the bars to change the chord from major to minor. Some of the early models had his picture on it, and auto harps continue today. And here is a Sears Roebuck catalog showing you auto harp. It also shows you the concert zither in the center, which is more of a professional instrument. So Zimmerman developed this system of reading music by a numbering system, and then needed to invent an instrument to apply a system, which is the auto harp. And today the original music is little remembered, but the auto harp still finds a place in schools and other functions, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware of. The concert zither that I showed you a picture of has 5 melody strings over frets and 27 accompanying strings. And this is more of a professional type instrument rather than a novelty zither. I'll show you a picture of the Franz Schwarzer concert zither. And then there are all sorts of other ones here as well. I do have some pictures of these. Here is the Schwarzer zither, really a pretty little instrument. This is out of the Smithsonian. Or something like a mellow harp, Oro harp. This is from the Smithsonian collection. See, single strings, there are no chords together. Or the Apollo harp, which was a funny way of having some sort of platform to make sure you hit the right string. But again, there are no chords here. These are single strings going from left to right. And some more instruments that I have found to try and fit them into this category. The pianophone is an interesting one here. A cheaper version of the piano phone called a piano harp was sold through Sears Roebuck. And Harold Spencer did have a piano phone. On the right is a 1908 advertisement in the Sears Roebuck catalog on there. He played that instrument. I happen to have some, I think I had copies of how to play chords on the Marx piano harp, and a lesson sheet. I put this on the Facebook group, and here is a play that barber shop chord. I guess that's the name of the music, and you can see it looks like nothing like what you would see if you were brought up reading music and playing music on conventional instruments. And I'm including here a 1952 instrument made down in San Diego called a harmoline, in case you run into that as well. The second major group of novelty zithers that I've tried to fit everything into are where the chord strings are together. And we have things like a Hawaiian tipple made by the Marxophone chime colony. This is the Marx family. It has 4 sets of 4 strings, and a movable bar can be slid over the top of the instrument under the strings that could change the musical key. There's an eBay seller I found that stated that these instruments were named Hawaiian something or other because for marketing purposes, as interest in Hawaiian music and culture was high in mainland America during the period the instruments were sold, 1920s and 1930s, it was a marketing strategy to call these instruments Hawaiian something, in this case, Hawaiian tipple. We have something called a Marxophone harp as well. And then we have a group called guitar zithers, which I call guitar zithers, in which the strings are arranged both in chords and in octaves. And this was patented in 1894. There are a number of these sorts of guitar zithers. The basic format is the same. The names may change quite a bit. Marx sold, quote, the American zither. Here is a typical situation where you see the chords are on the left in groups of strings, and on the right are single strings going up an octave. And again, the argument was that you can play hundreds of songs immediately, no lessons needed, you don't have to read music, blah, 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 blah. Take it with you anywhere. And 1900 Sears catalog, guitar zithers. And there are instruction books for these. I put this one on the Facebook group. And the back of it to give you some idea of prices here. Cute. And as I say, there are all sorts of names for the same basic format here. You can take a look at that. There's some really unusual ones like the Zitho harp, sold by Sears Roebuck. And some others. There's another Hawaiian, etc. Now the interesting one was they started to put attachments on a guitar zither to strike the strings, and there are many variations of this, and there are many instruments that the same instrument was given different names. And here's a bunch of them. Basically, they're all basically the same instrument, and it's called a mandolin harp, etc. And I call this a Ukelin harp. So you can take a look at this and see the different names, and I'll show you what the instrument actually looks like. I have at least the first page of the instruction manual. I might have actually even had the whole manual that went when I broke up my collection. But you can see here that's a guitar zither, and there's a platform there that you press keys, and you can vibrate strings. It's a moving platform. It's I lumped them all onto Ukelin harp. Because it's in honor of Admiral Dewey. and buttons to press ebony picks which are used to vibrate the melody strings by a rolling platform. So here is Harold Pops Spencer playing the Ukelin harp. This is from my 1986 tape. He sent me this, and I edited this with Audacity, removed the background noise, reduced the bass, reduced frequencies above 3500 hertz. And note that Pops like to strum through the chords rather than hitting them quickly. So let me give you some Ukelin harp music. I'm not even sure what tune this is. Hope you enjoyed that. The Marxophone, I really enjoyed it when I had one. It was really fun to play. On my biology songs, I do have one song on the Marxophone. It had a mechanism to hit the keys rapidly, or singly, or rapidly on that. There's also the Shortola, which is another way of hitting the strings. So all sorts of ways and all sorts of attachments. So here is a picture that Harold sent me. And let's put labels on these things. Unlabeled in front of him is something called the Hawaiian Art Violin, the precursor to the Ukelin, which is to his right, on the very left of the scene. But you can see all of the basically guitar zithers with attachments on them. The Marxophone is on the left. Those are the things you press in that have lead weights on the top. Quite a number. We'll talk about the Hawaiian tremolo and some of these others as we go through this. And of course, Marxophone music was sold. You can take a look at that. If you do have a Marxophone, then these are the sorts of songs that might be played on that. And here's a price list of them. I mean, we're talking about 1920s, 1930s here. And you can see that here, even though this is a Marx instrument, it's made in East Boston, Massachusetts. And some more of these guitar zithers with attachments on them. The Hawaiian tremolo is a really crazy instrument. I've seen several instruments for sale minus the arm. You might wonder why it looks the way it does. There is a single or a double melody string, and you roll a roller over the string to create a tremoling sound. Or you can go from high to low frequency real fast. This is from the Smithsonian's Institution online. It doesn't really show it as well as I'd like to do. that the chords are on the bottom. In this case, it's a double string on the top, and that arm at the end of it on the upper left actually has a roller, so maybe not be as clear, and you roll it over the string to get the sound. Crazy sound. And here is from Harold. He showed me a picture of his some of his equipment, and there's the tremolo on the upper part. However, my favorites are the bowed zithers, and the bowed zithers are instruments that you play with a bow. And you've already heard the ukelin at the beginning. I'm going to show you two other instrumentations here. The Hawaiian art violin is the precursor of the ukelin. I have an instruction book copyrighted 1922, and Paul Richter probably invented the art violin, and he also invented basically the ukelin as well. And here is from Harold's collection. He sent me a picture of his Hawaiian art violin. I have an old ad that was trying to sell this to the public. And there's their factory. It looks impressive. And I've already read to you the upper right of that. There are instructions for playing it. I think I put this on the files on that Facebook group. You got a guarantee that your instrument was made really well, however that's worth. You got a year ability to have them tune it for free as well. But it's the ukelin that gets the most attention, because that is the one that appears most often in swap meets, etc. I want to spend a little bit more time on this. Mugwumps magazine in 1983 had a major article on the ukelin, and they called it that marvel of musical madness known to its friends and foes alike as the ukelin. You can still purchase back issues of Mugwumps from a place called Elderly Instruments. Elderly Instruments. So Russ Johnson, who I met in the late 1970s, told me in a letter, wrote to me, that a man and his wife sold mine to my dad in 1934 as door-to-door salesman. I had to learn a song between the hours of 2 and 6 p.m., and if I could play it in that length of time, my dad would buy it for half price. They always sold for half price. And so he learned how to play old spinning wheel, and his father bought it for him, and Russ told me that ukelin players are hard to find. And so he was playing that for 45 years, that ukelin, before he and I got together, and I recorded. So I'm going to splice in here a meeting I had with Russ. He was visiting relatives in Brea, California. It was a noisy area. I had a little tape recorder that I was trying to get this down. When I listened to this just a second ago, the sound was very low. I tried to push it up a little bit. It's his own creation called Flitten, and from that 1986 tape, using Audacity to try and enhance it as best I can. So you might have to raise your volume on this a little bit. It also includes my 1986 introduction to it. The other person who has a love of these instruments is a person by the name of Russ Johnson, who I met in the late 1970s and showed me actually how to play this instrument. And he was located outside of Yuma, Arizona in Squaw Lake, and used to play these instruments as well. Russ really was the epitome of playing these instruments, and it wouldn't really be fair for the listener to hear what they sound like without hearing
Russ, who had been playing a ukulele for over 45 years. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to splice in some ukulele music from Russ Johnson, which I tape recorded, onto this, and then I will put this on this tape.
He's flitting around over here, see? Because it's just, you know.
Well, you have a lot more mobility of the bow, because I have to bring it across
Right.
and really lift it up quite a bit more.
Yeah, that's right. And just...
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. Let's hear my rendition of it after 12 years playing. Pretty good, except for the ending, I think. So Pop also liked Ukelin. In a newspaper article in 1980 in the Beaufort Gazette, he said that the ukulele was the instrument that sparked his interest in antique musical apparatus. He couldn't read music. He tuned it unaided. I just start off and pitch them all till it sounds pleasant. And he wanted to be a success in professional music. He never really reached that point. Some people who are good on other instruments, he said, make a heck of a living at it. Somewhere I want to click and make a better living. But he did do a lot of community outreach with his instruments in terms of that. So here is a little bit about the ukulele. I'm not going to go over that with you. You could always pause it and find out more about the instrument. There is a website which has a major section on the ukulele, and I'm giving you the address for it there. A lot of the links don't work. And he has a section on some of the artists that play the ukulele, including some information that he got from Pop Spencer. And you can read that at your leisure. And there he is. He sent me this photo with his ukulele. So eventually the ukulele was stopped production. And the president of Oscar Schmidt International wrote that, quote, I stopped making ukuleles because I learned that those salesmen you wrote about were absolutely ripping off people, and because there was no true demand for the ukulele in legitimate music stores. He was getting complaints about from people that ukulins were being sold to, let's say, people who were in the household, and when the wage earner came in and found out they had been bought and they couldn't play very many tunes on them, they weren't happy at all. So he terminated all production of the ukulins in 1964. So Harold tried to find out more information about ukulins. I think this is kind of funny. In 1974, he wrote to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. They probably never seen a ukulin. And they responded by saying, I'm sorry, they're short on staff. They have no idea how this instrument is played. I think it probably was meant originally to be plucked or strummed, maybe, rather than bowed. Well, no, that's not true. He also wrote to the Smithsonian, which had a canned response. So enough people had written that they told him a little bit about the instrument, and you're welcome to take a look at this. You can pause the video. There are direction manuals. This says it's from the Boston Company in Massachusetts. This one says it's from Oscar Schmidt International Corporation, Jersey City. And this particular one was put on the Facebook group by a person named Matt Coach, who has put a number of instruction manuals for the various Novelty Zithers there. So we owe some gratitude to Matt for doing that. I have in my collection the contract that was signed, that the argument was that if you could sell 6 of these to neighbors, that you could get your instrument for free. That's why it's a manufacturer's advertising company. Jersey City address. And if you went on eBay today, which I did, this is let's see, this is October 25th. There are 46 ukulins for sale, including some with music, instruction books, bow, everything. I have some advertisements, as you can see here, the prices of the various components of it. There was also a similar instrument, much smaller, called a Violin-uke, made by the Marxophone company called Charles Henry Marx, 1920s. You can read about that. And here's my pictures of the Violin-uke on the top, and then in comparison to the ukulin that's beneath it. And I have the instruction manual for the Violin-uke that is on the Facebook website. Music was produced for the Violin-uke, Marxophone, Hawaiiaphone, by the Marx people in New Troy, Michigan. They advertised it. Prices went up. Here it's $39.95, and here it's $69.50. And a variation of the Violin-uke called the pianolin was also made. And I've seen on eBay a listing for this. It's identical to the Violin-uke that I have. See here is 2 instruments by Marx. They're both called Violin-uke. They both have the name Violin-uke. The one in the bottom is being sold on eBay, and it has the name pianolin or piano-et. So same instrument, different names. And some more of these Ukelin type instruments. So I'm showing you a set of references here. And something about mugwumps, which also has articles on the Marxophone and the tremola. So we have reached the end of this video. I hope it not only entertained you, but gave you information about the Novelty Zithers. So this has been another JDW Talks on YouTube. My background is in biology, but recently, since I retired, I have become an expert on the United States Census. I have talks there, and Ellis Island immigration. I also have a number of biology talks on YouTube, including some virtual field trips, biology songs accompanied by the Zithers as well that are there. So you're welcome to take a look at those, even subscribe to my channel. So thanks for listening and watching. Enjoy.